Everybody, Tim Hughes here and Ed Fowler. We're talking artificial intelligence transformed.
We are.
Ed, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And this week we're talking AI.
You're red, Ed, today, aren't you?
I am quite pink today. It was a conscious choice. I was dealing with some of the more conservative clients out there. I thought they needed the whole visual appeal needed to get a bit more colourful.
Yeah, it actually makes the red in the
everything.
books and the DVDs stand out behind you.
They're just DVDs. How dare you say they're all books? Anyway, today we're doing AI and trust.
Yeah.
Which is a series of conversations I've been having with people, but they were kind of triggered by an article in Nature about scientific reproducibility, which led down to a bit of a wormhole of research I was doing. And I'll kind of start it slightly in reverse. About 4 years ago, they started using AIs to generate mathematical proofs. Now, a lot of people think mathematical proofs are kind of slightly abstract, but they're the bedrock of which most of our technology is based upon. Is if you peeled it back and had the time, which is almost impossible these days, but you could peel back layer upon layer upon layer down to a 100% logical causal proof that you could walk through. And indeed, if you were doing a Euclidean proof, you're only allowed very simple tools like a string and a ruler with no measurement, just a straight line and a pencil and a compass. And they give you the ability to absolutely prove the logical chain of events which links something forward. So everything built on top of that, you can trust that it's repeatable and reproducible. About 4 years ago, they started using AIs to generate some mathematical proofs. And these were long-held, very complex areas. Some of the implications of proving Fermat's last theorem, etc., second and third order implications, which had to be basically expanded. And the first one that this generated was a mathematical proof, which was 75,000 pages long. It was effectively labeled as transhumanly complicated. Now, they tested this by effectively reverse engineering it. They've had tool sets since Fermat, in fact, that basically give you an ability to check. So you would describe this proof as code. You'd feed it into a logical check engine, and I think there's a current platform called Lean that mathematicians use that goes, yeah, that logic is valid. You have a causal chain that links that to that to that to that. Therefore, this is a good proof. Now, they started basically going is, could we use an AI in probability mode and start looking for areas that could be proven and then expanding out? And this was hailed as a new way forward, that mathematicians were going to have this ability to do a second brain. Until somebody pointed out that this couldn't be reproduced by a human. So if there was, say, somewhere did need to track back, the proof ends at the AI, instead of being able to reduce it to fundamental mathematical terms. Then this was viewed as kind of an abstract thing. Yeah, mathematicians are going to worry about this, and it's not something anybody else is going to give a monkeys about. But this is something now quite important, because the same model is now being used for scientific experiments. And it was recently pulled out that they had a few that Nature called out, but there's some others that have been brought out. I think there was an article in the New York Times where they talk about material science. So they've started using this for more effective dipoles and diodes that you would use inside solar panels. And the Google-backed AI has generated 4 million interesting compounds that have likely behaviors. And then these compounds are fully sketched out as this is how you would make that compound, etc. Now that sounds wonderful, but again, the problem is you can't reverse engineer the experiment. You can only brute force the experiment. And because there's this gap now between effectively an empirical result and an experimental result based on theory, you have what's called a faith gap. Carl Sagan started talking about that you use science and mathematics as a candle in the darkness. And every time you create this faith gap, you're asking somebody to take something on trust because it cannot be proven. That candle flickers slightly, was his point. Now, Carl Sagan was talking about a lot about skepticism and the ability to believe any message that's put in front of you. But that trust point is now starting to become relatively fundamental in multiple areas. So you've got this thing that's happening in mathematics, and mathematicians are spending a lot of time, every time a new proof is coming out, a lot of very, very smart people start reverse engineering the proof and go, yeah, that is real, which kind of relegates the human experience from being the person that discovered this form of mathematics to the person that checked the AI sums. Now, as these things get more complicated, that faith gap's getting bigger. So scientists are already starting to say, well, we haven't been able to reproduce some of these experiments very easily. If you use a probabilistic engine in the middle of it, these experiments become challenging to put through. So we get this sort of step away from rationality, which is starting to become what they call a systemic risk. And there's a lot of scientific people. I noticed there was a UN committee started to form about this, that the use of AI cannot reduce this replaceability. Because at this point, if you can't reproduce it and you can't tie it back to a fundamental, is it really our technology anymore? Is it becoming more of a sort of a cargo cult, or even sort of a magical ritual, or sort of a Kabbalism type approach? Sure, the results may be reproducible for certain effects, but you can't tell me why it's happening. At a societal level, that's a risk. So this is an area that's starting to get a lot of people start thinking about it. And one of the things about it is this constant work is now there's almost like an AI checker maker type dynamic being proposed, where an AI might propose, this is a new scientific experiment, this is a new mathematical theorem. But because these things are coming out as so complicated that the human ability to reverse it backwards is a problem. So you're now going to have almost like an assured or guaranteed AI. At the moment, we're using this lean platform, which is strictly mechanistic. It's not really an AI, it's a logic engine. But in the future, they're going to be augmented by AIs that are very highly assured, and a lot of people looking at them that would start to reverse unpick that logic and say, well, actually, this is there. Now, this is relatively sort of black and white. We need to be able to trust our mathematics. We need to be able to trust our science. Ignoring the sort of societal effects of lack of trust in science, which is mostly generated by publicity, funding, funder type issues, and a media cycle that loves to publish what appears to be controversy rather than consensus. We need to be able to trust it because we place an awful lot of trillion-dollar bets on our technology working. Now, if you put it, imagine if you created any further trust or doubt in, say, climate science, people would start already rebelling against the thing that's been very successfully muddied by various large oil companies and government actors, etc. But if you had that in vaccines, which we're already seeing, if you said you had that in how aeroplanes work, or is the world flat, they become quite serious issues. Now, that's kind of an obvious area. When people, we talk through this all the time. We go through these type of conversations. One of the things that's very interesting to have a think about and look about is where we go into areas where we don't yet have a fully rational method for making these decisions anyway. So human beings aren't particularly great at making rational decisions.
We don't make rational decisions.
No, we don't. I mean, there's an awful lot of gut feel, post facto justification, etc., etc. And one of the areas that started to come out, which I thought was a really fascinating article that came out in The Banker, which it's not the world's most interesting publication. It can sometimes actually be slightly scurrilous. But they had a fascinating...
We'll get loads of letters from bankers soon saying, how dare you say that?
Well, with luck. Maybe they can understand it. One of the things we're basically seeing is what's called pseudo-rational actors. So one of the things that AIs like generative AI have been described as is expensive bullshit at scale. They can generate vast amounts of stuff that looks reasonable, but can be used to change a result. But they're expensive. You're not getting the accurate result you want out of them. Now, people poo-pooed that as if it was a bad thing. People say, these are just bullshit engines. They just create stuff. And that's great if your proposition is, I don't want to replace somebody who's doing coding. So for coding, it needs to be accurate. I can't have this bullshit engine about it. However, if you're a market maker with less than perfect ethics, being able to generate thousands of what appears to be relatively reasonable messages on media might generate more interest. That's like highly targeted, data-driven advertising. For the older amongst us, remember the privatization of British Gas, or was it British Telecom? I think it was British Gas. Tell Sid.
Tell Sid. There was something recently. There was some crypto thing. Announcement that went on X, and Bitcoin went up.
Yeah, exactly.
And then went back down again when people realized it was actually fake.
And that sort of market manipulation, which initially was done by, we'll generate a lot of interest, we'll span this out to the British populace by spending a lot of money on mass market advertising. Now it's done by just triggering a bunch of stuff. But people can see that that's a small scale effect. It's like short-term market manipulation. it may be possible with the data-driven engines and this market manipulation to actually generate really quite significant shifts in public opinion at a basal level about companies and operations by targeting that message very coherently to you, effectively being as effective as a lobbyist, but with the cost per user of standard advertising.
And this could be done, 2024, which is, we're currently talking in December 2023. 2024, there's lots of elections right across the world.
Exactly. So you start getting to the point where you can manipulate people quite a lot in this one. And this initially started, the thinking was around, well, capital markets, frankly. You can move money. So whilst bankers sometimes are as irrational as everybody else, at the end of it, they measure success by a very binary measure. Did that number go up or down? And that gives them at least a significant dose of reality. That the worry has become is not just that you're using AIs to create media type stuff, but you're actually using AIs patterning to create large amounts of trades. Now, patterned trades can have an effect. Now, patterns, people go, well, I want to trade in the most efficient manager. I will buy 1 million shares or 1 million bonds at once because I can negotiate the lowest commission. A pattern trade is, I'm going to spread my 1 million bond purchase across the day in microsecond instances to then basically get that to maximum effect. So if I can shave off 0.1%, I've made money. An AI one that's basically doing that pattern trade and also using second-by-second market manipulation via Twitter or via the media or even just any sort of social WhatsApp messages means that I can shade that from 0.1% to maybe 0.1/5% or maybe 0.5%. I can make quite a lot more money by manipulating the market around it. And at the moment, the regulators have no way to bridge the gap. You wouldn't be able to tell if my trading system or logic engine is tied in with this market manipulation engine to give me best effect. It's like a supermarket maker on a second-by-second basis with no way for the regulators to check. So the regulators have started bringing this out and going, you've got to be able to address why that decision was made. So why did you choose that second just then to make that trade? Explain that through your algorithm engines. And by the way, can you explain this coincidental thing that came out on Twitter or came out in WhatsApp messages that triggered that off? Now, at the moment, you're seeing a relatively crude causal link between this. You're seeing, here's some trades, and here's somebody spamming out about, yay, this is great, and they're directly linked. What the regulators are starting to worry about is, yeah, here's some patterns of trades, and actually here's something that's totally different rigged. Now, on a sort of darker note, you saw the messages that the Israeli intelligence services have believed that a large number of traders were shorting Israel before the October the 7th attacks, as if somebody had market knowledge about that. And it was the subject of a series of sort of dramas in the 80s after Big Bang in the UK, where people would use global events that were initiated. I think there was like a currency event and a bomb going off at the White House to drive down specific trading models to make money. Now, this patterns of behavior actually become quite achievable with an AI if you're being truly unethical. Because not only could you trigger news type events, but because you can now manipulate people on a very fine level, you can literally say, well, actually, no, this message has been truly true. I've radicalized that individual to this end. Instead of this person being radicalized for the purpose that they believe they're in, which could be as noble as climate science, as could be ignoble as some form of terrorism, the terrorist act that they trigger is not for the benefits of their purported purpose. It is for the benefits of this trade that you're trying to execute. And that's becoming an area that's starting to get quite concerning. There are a series of sort of intra-government committees starting to form up between some of the regulators, the more forward-thinking regulators, which is people like Singapore, people like the US. Britain's not been too bad in this one. We have a very nuanced AI regulation model in the UK. But they're also starting to now worry about how does this link between this and with the media, particularly this targeted disinformation, targeted information. Because at the end of it, the fear is now that we're almost incentivizing these people to pull these triggers. It's something that's being done very, very deliberately to now put it forward. And we've seen some experiments now. There are a series of spam messages which were being sent out in North America by SMS. I know it's a bit of a dead medium, being sent out on a daily basis to generate fear. And nobody's yet been able to track down which of the sort of unethical hacking type models were pushing this. But they've been basically triggering people to phone their bank. They've been triggering people to do this. And one of the fears was they were trying to say to people, basically, this looks almost identical to a bank communication and is actually not designed to hack you. It is designed to make you pick up the phone to your bank.
And or force a run on the bank.
It wasn't actually that clever. It wasn't designed for you to go get cash. Right. It was designed for you to pick the phone up to the bank and flood their call center, or maybe flood their website, so you could do some other nefarious act. Now, it doesn't appear in any of the ones I read about, which there was an article in one of the financial pages. There didn't appear to be a payload event. They were just kind of triggering the fact that they had the delivery mechanism for this type of issue. And again, this now pulls back to is how do you trust any form of sort of information as a Joe Schmo in the street when anything in front of you could be AI generated? I can imagine in 5 years' time, Tim, that this conversation could be very easily replicated by an AI because there's enough data to simulate me and you to a similar effect and just feed it a script.
Yeah.
That could be generated in real time. When any communication, for example, there's the current scam at the moment where somebody goes, "Hi, it's your grandkid. Please send me money. I'm trapped in a beach. I've lost my phone in Thailand," or whatever. And somebody who's vulnerable picks up the phone and goes, "Oh my God, I must act," and then acts at that point. It's very possible to trigger that kind of behavior very much more rapidly. But for example, I didn't know you were on holiday in Thailand, for example, when actually their social media posts have now had generated photographs that look like they are on a beach in Thailand. And then suddenly there's no way to disbelieve this loop, which pulls us all the way back to this trust-based model. So one of Carl Sagan's better books was this Demon Haunted World, where he describes science as a candle in the darkness. But the underpinning conversation of the best is a robust skepticism that must be engendered in public discourse. Now, he was worried about stuff in the mid-90s. Carl Sagan died in the 90s, but he was worried in the 90s that there were charlatan-like media commentators and charlatan-like politicians who were manipulating the public for their own events. And that the American public in particular, because he was American and talking about America, they weren't equipped to deal with this. They tended to take people, because they're an open people, they tended to take people on face value. Now, those people could be very vulnerable to this type of behavior. So how did you inculcate into a society to be skeptical, to be the, nah, I don't believe that type response? And this is an area that there's quite a lot of research coming out to, is how do we put visual triggers up? Now, you can see in any message that is presented by a screen, that can be faked. Any message that can be generated by sound, that can be faked as well. So literally you get back to the sort of Mark 1 eyeball, Mark 1 ear as the only way to assure that this is there. So there's been some discussion on how to put effectively watermarks in images. This is an AI generated image. It's got a watermark in it, which was an interesting response to a particularly strange little criminal kit that came out on Reddit, which was artificial fingers modeled on your own fingers that sit over the finger. So if anybody took a photograph of you committing a criminal act, your lawyer could go, that's patently AI because they've got 7 fingers, because AIs are not very good at hands. But those kind of visual triggers inside an AI would put up that this is an AI that has made it as some form of waterproof mark. And they were saying that this maybe have to be done for sound as well. There may be high-pitched sounds which would be discernible to a human ear, but wouldn't get in the way of understanding a message. So, for example, the AIs may be forced to demodulate some of their capabilities. Now, that plays into a very heavy regulatory model. Yeah. This would be something that we've insisted on. That's kind of an EU-type regulation model. It's based around this thing that this is irreversible. The sort of UK, US, Australia type view has been that there will be ways to put this into consumer devices. So instead of the AI being responsible for having these trust-based measures into it, the consumer device. So, for example, instead of making OpenAI sort it out, you would put it into Chrome or Firefox. You would put that thing there. You would put it into the device on your phone to say this is likely to be a scam message, etc. And I think there's going to be an increasing arms war about this. But as with all sort of arms wars, there's never any clear winner. The rates of innovation are very high. So it's things more like how do we inculcate into our effectively people? They've got to start treating things with a much more skeptical, much more compelling, like, hold on a minute, none of this makes sense. Now, to sort of peel back on this one, it's kind of a dual-edged sword. We have AI that's going to give us huge productive powers. Some of the mathematicians I've been speaking to regard AI as broadly equivalent to the abacus, broadly equivalent to the introduction of Indian numeral sets, the sort of the 0 to 10. As important as one guy told me, as important as 0. It will be, because we can generate so much more work. And then there's other guys going, well, that's a challenge because we have this gap. Now, if we can identify a gap, there's always ways to mitigate a risk. And I think that's important, that we identify these gaps. But the benefit space we're seeing in science, mathematics, banking is going to be so large that these things are going to be adopted regardless. So it means that the risk-based model is going to have to be based quite nuanced. Sometimes it's going to be technology-centric, as we've seen with the regulators, but sometimes it's going to be just people actually having to go, well, hold on a minute, I didn't know anything about that. I haven't spoken to that person in person. Why should I trust this message? So that was a quick canter through this area of trust. And we had a bunch of articles that we put up, which I think are on the attached.
They're all on LinkedIn. All of the articles that you've talked about are on LinkedIn, and they will be placed on YouTube as well.
And I think it's an area that we're going to see a lot of regulate, because regulators are going to get jumpy. We're going to see some big events happening. There'll be somebody who gets a casus belli, and the regulators are going to be, the instinctive model is going to jump on it. And you're going to see some very interesting dynamics as the more sort of optimistic forces are going to be starting to push back against that. So it could be a really interesting new year, particularly as I don't know if you've played with it yet. The new version of Bard came out today, the Google competitor to
I haven't, no.
It's a lot better. There is an ongoing debate. Is it better than ChatGPT? I think for certain use cases, it's superb. It's a game changer. According to the people inside Google that I'm aware of, I haven't spoken to about, I'm aware of, this is not even the full version of Gemini that's been released yet. So that's going to put additional pressures on the multimodal model that is rumored for ChatGPT 4.5, which could come out before Christmas, or a 4.5-like update, and also ChatGPT 5, which is rumored for sometime next year, as well as the open source stuff as well. So it's going to be a really fascinating area between regulator, between developer, evangelist, and potentially some sort of potential interesting stories as well.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it. And next, in 2 weeks, it will be our last one for 2023.
Yeah. We'll have a very rapid wash up of where we are, roundup of what we've changed, and then a bit of a future ball session as what do we think is going to come for the next year as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much again, Ed.
Thank you for having me. Catch you soon.
And see you soon.
Take care now. Bye.